As we close the vaults and let the echoes of history settle, remember that every secret, every story, and every hidden truth has shaped the world we live in today. From the stars Galileo dared to chart, to the silent diplomacy of popes, from forbidden books to unseen paintings, these tales remind us that history is alive, waiting for curious minds willing to explore, question, and reflect. If these journeys through faith, power, and the shadows of human ambition captivated your imagination, join us in uncovering the mysteries that history tried to hide. Like this video to honor the voices that spoke in silence, share it to invite others to step beyond the known, and subscribe to Mysteries of Earth to stay with us on every path of discovery. Every click is more than support. It is a promise to keep seeking, learning, and witnessing the untold stories of our world. Beneath the bustling streets of modern Rome, where scooters hum and tourists trace the ruins of emperors, another city lies in silence, untouched by time, sealed away from the world above. Down there the air grows colder, thicker. The light fades until even memory begins to whisper differently. Stone corridors twist into darkness, lined with iron doors and walls, heavy with centuries of forgotten voices. For more than 1,200 years, this underworld of archives and chambers has served as the Vatican's most silent guardian. It is said that over 80 kilometers of shelves are hidden here, filled not just with holy decrees and papal letters, but the very pulse of human history. Every sealed envelope, every fragile parchment, is a fragment of power preserved through faith and fear. Few are ever allowed inside, and even fewer understand what they see. The oldest rooms were built over ancient Roman foundations, places where pagan temples once stood. In these depths, Christianity met the empire it would one day replace. Marble slabs from forgotten gods became the walls of God's new kingdom. Over time, layer by layer, the Vatican buried its own history beneath its feet. Not to destroy it, but to guard it. Because some truths, they say, are too sacred or too dangerous to live in daylight. Here rest the letters of Galileo, quietly apologizing to the church that silenced him. Here lie the reports of inquisitors describing miracles that defied their doctrine. There are maps of continents before they were named, letters between popes and kings sealed with blood and wax, and confessions written by men who once commanded armies in God's name. Every document tells two stories, one for the faithful and one for those who dared to ask why. Together, they form a mirror to humanity itself, our thirst for knowledge, our hunger for control, and our fear of the divine unknown. In these underground halls, time stands still, not because it has stopped, but because the church decided it must not move. Dust gathers not from neglect, but reverence. And while the modern world debates faith in pixels and headlines, down here the questions remain carved into stone, just as they were centuries ago. If you listen long enough, you might hear it, the faint sound of quills scratching parchment, the soft echo of monks at work, preserving what the world was never meant to forget. Every heartbeat in these walls reminds us that history isn't always lost. Sometimes it's simply waiting. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of all, that beneath Rome's shining cathedrals and holy prayers, there lies another kind of church, one built not of faith, but of memory, a place where truth sleeps, untouched, until someone dares to open the door. Deep within the Vatican's heart lies a sanctum few have ever entered, the secret archives, a labyrinth of shelves stretching further than the eye can follow. It is said that more than 12 centuries of human memory sleep here, sealed behind iron doors and watched by silence itself. Every lock, every barrier was not built to protect what is inside from the world, but to protect the world from what is inside. In this forbidden library, light feels foreign. The air carries the faint scent of ink and dust, the breath of ages long past. Here, time is not measured by calendars, but by the slow fading of parchment. Thousands of volumes, millions of pages, each one a fragment of civilization's heartbeat. Empires that rose in the name of God, and those that fell by his command, all left their confessions here. Behind one shelf, wrapped in faded silk, lies a letter from a queen who begged the church for salvation as her kingdom collapsed. Another shelf holds a decree signed by a pope who once excommunicated an entire nation. There are chronicles of wars that never reached the history books, alliances formed in candlelit chambers, treaties sealed with faith and betrayal. But the most haunting relics are not those of power, but of silence. There are testimonies of saints deemed too human to canonize, scientists whose discoveries challenged creation, and artists whose visions were buried beneath doctrine. Their words remain here, hidden not because they were false, but because they were true before their time. To enter these vaults is to stand before the dual face of humanity, belief and control intertwined. Every document is both revelation and restraint, a reminder that knowledge has always been a sacred weapon. The Church, in its wisdom and its fear, gathered these truths not to destroy them, but to guard them, to decide when the world was ready to see. There are doors, of course, of lost gospels written by the hands of the apostles themselves, of letters that prove ancient pacts between thrones and altars, of artifacts whose existence would challenge history itself. Some say the archives hold the evidence of forgotten miracles, or of secrets that could unravel centuries of faith. The Vatican denies such claims, as it always has. Yet the silence that follows feels heavier than any denial. Those who have walked these halls speak of the same feeling, a weight pressing upon the soul, as if the walls themselves remember too much. They say that after a while you stop breathing normally. You feel watched, not by men, but by the past. Perhaps that is what makes this place sacred. Not the documents themselves, but the humility they demand. Within these forbidden vaults, one realizes that truth is not a single flame, but 1,000 flickering lights, each burning for a moment, before the next takes its place. And as the door closes once more, the air grows still again. The parchment sighs, the ink sleeps, and the world above continues unaware, never knowing that beneath its cathedrals, behind triple-locked doors, the story of mankind lies waiting, a story too powerful for daylight and too fragile to forget. In the Vatican's shadowed corridors, where the air carries the scent of parchment and candle smoke, there exists a collection unlike any other. Letters written by popes across centuries, yet never delivered. Each one still bears the papal seal, untouched by human hands since the day it was pressed. Their wax has hardened, their words have faded, but the silence they hold remains alive. No one knows exactly how many there are. A few dozen, perhaps 100. They rest inside hidden drawers of carved oak, stored away by secretaries long forgotten, each envelope a window into a moment of hesitation, of mercy unspoken, or of fear too great to confess aloud. One letter, dated in the 15th century, was addressed to a queen condemned for heresy. In it, the Pope's handwriting trembles, not with anger, but with sorrow. He wrote of forgiveness, of understanding her search for truth beyond the Church's reach. Yet the letter was never sent. Perhaps a whisper in the Curia warned him that compassion could be mistaken for weakness. The seal was set aside. The woman burned. Another letter, found centuries later, was written during the age of the Inquisition. It was not addressed to a monarch or a priest, but to God himself. The Pope who wrote it pleaded for guidance, haunted by the flames that consumed the accused. He questioned whether judgment in the name of faith could ever truly serve heaven. The ink stops mid-sentence, as though the writer could no longer bear the thought. Not all the letters speak of guilt. Some contain dreams. One speaks of uniting East and West, of healing the rift between Rome and Constantinople. Another outlines a vision of the church stripped of gold and glory, a return to simplicity, where faith is found not in power, but in presence. These too were hidden away. The world was not ready for popes who doubted the perfection of their own empire. To read these words, or even imagine them, is to glimpse the humanity beneath the tiara. The popes of legend appear as rulers, prophets, symbols of divine will. Yet these letters remind us that they were also men who wept in private, who feared being wrong, who longed for peace but were chained by politics, tradition, and time. Perhaps that is why the Church never destroyed them. To burn these letters would be to erase its own humanity. So they remain, preserved like silent prayers, tucked between walls of marble and secrecy. Every so often, a scholar or a priest is granted permission to see one. They describe an overwhelming stillness, as if standing in the presence of something sacred yet unfinished. The words, though written centuries ago, seem to speak to every age, warning that even faith is not free from doubt. And so the letters stay sealed, not because they hold heresy, but because they reveal something even more dangerous: the vulnerability of those chosen to speak for God. Down in those quiet rooms, where ink has become dust and paper breathes like memory, the truth lingers. The Pope's unsent words still wait, not for their recipients, but for the courage of humanity to finally read them. He was not a man of title or robe, not a priest or scholar, merely a custodian, one of the silent few who moved unseen through the Vatican's endless halls. His job was simple: to guard what others feared to touch, to dust, to polish, to keep the forbidden vaults breathing quietly beneath the weight of time. He had no authority, no power, only a key and a conscience. But sometimes, that is all it takes to uncover history's deepest wounds. His name is seldom spoken in the Vatican today, erased from official record, replaced by silence. But his story lives in whispers among archivists and night guards who still walk those marble corridors. They say it began on an autumn night decades ago, when a single lamp flickered inside the archives after closing hours. The keeper had noticed a pattern. Certain sections of the vault always marked restricted, sealed not just by locks, but by secrecy itself. There were no catalogues, no entries, just blank records in the archive's vast index, as though those documents never existed. Curiosity, once planted, grew in the dark. And so, one night, guided only by the faint echo of his own footsteps, he used his master key to open a door that hadn't turned in over 100 years. The air that escaped was colder than stone. Inside, he found rows of unmarked chests, each bound in leather, each sealed with wax. On one lid, a date, 1610, another, 1943, and another, older still, marked with a cross drawn in trembling ink. He opened one, then another. Inside he found the kind of truth that doesn't speak. It stares. Letters from popes admitting their doubts, reports of miracles suppressed because they defied doctrine, diaries of priests who had witnessed things too divine or too human for the Church to ever acknowledge, and worse, correspondence between the Vatican and powerful regimes, names of those saved and those condemned in the name of faith and survival. The keeper read until the lamp began to dim. Each page felt heavier than the last. The world he thought he knew, the church he had served all his life, began to shift before him. It was not betrayal he found there, but complexity. A faith both radiant and flawed, capable of compassion and cruelty in the same breath. He sealed the chests again, closed the door, and left the archives as dawn broke over Rome. But something within him had changed. He could not unknow what he had seen. For weeks he wandered the Vatican gardens in silence, unable to pray, unable to speak. Some say he confessed to a priest, others that he wrote his own letter, one final testimony, and hid it among the archives he once cleaned. Soon after, he vanished. No record of resignation, no trace of departure, only a note found on his empty desk. The truth is not what we protect. It is what we fear to understand. Today, no one knows where he went. Some believe he fled Rome, others that he lies buried beneath it, among the very vaults he once guarded. But those who work the night shifts in the Vatican still tell the story of a humble keeper who saw what no one should and paid the price for knowing too much. And somewhere beneath the marble and gold, in the stillness of the archives, a single lamp sometimes flickers, as if he never left. Long before it became a fortress of secrets, the Vatican Archives began as something humble, a collection of letters written by saints and kings, bishops and emperors, stored in wooden chests to preserve the conversations between heaven and earth. They were words of devotion, law, and confession, bound together by faith. But like all things that endure too long, faith began to gather shadows. It was the 4th century when the Church first realized the power of paper. Empires rose and fell, yet the written word endured. A decree, a signature, a promise sealed with wax, these could shape kingdoms more effectively than armies. By the time the Holy See established itself in Rome, the papal letters were no longer just messages of faith. They were instruments of power. Over centuries, the collection grew. Popes ordered copies of royal treaties, inquisitorial records, maps drawn by explorers who sailed under the sign of the cross. Each document told a story, not just of God, but of how mankind used his name. As Europe plunged into wars and revolutions, the Church preserved every fragment, every confession, every mistake, not to boast of them, but to remember. Yet memory, when accumulated, becomes weight. By the Renaissance, the archives were too vast, too dangerous to remain open. Hidden among the papal bulls and encyclicals were letters that contradicted doctrine, accounts of heresy within the clergy, and testimonies that questioned miracles. Knowledge became both shield and weapon. So, in 1612, Pope Paul V made a decision that would echo through history. He locked it all away. He ordered the archives sealed from the eyes of the world. Access would be granted only to the chosen few, under strict command. It was no longer a library. It was a vault. And thus, the most secret repository of human history was born. Behind its new walls, the archives became a mirror of the Church itself, both a sanctuary of truth and a prison for it. The Vatican claimed it was to protect the purity of faith, but many suspected otherwise. Within those iron doors slept the proof of humanity's contradictions. Popes blessing wars in the name of peace, kings confessing to sins history would never record, scientists pleading for understanding, while their discoveries were silenced. For centuries, even the existence of the archives remained hidden from the public. Only rumors escaped its marble tomb. Some said it contained the missing books of the Bible, others that it guarded the correspondence between the Church and unseen powers. To the faithful, it was a treasury of divine history. To skeptics, a vault of control. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. The archives are not simply about power. They are about fear. The fear of losing control over the story of humanity's relationship with the divine. For every faith, there is a moment when belief must face the evidence of its own imperfection. The Vatican, in its wisdom or its caution, chose preservation over revelation. Even today, deep under the palaces of the Holy See, the archives remain bound in silence. Scholars are granted glimpses, a page here, a letter there, but never the full truth. It is said that more than 50 miles of shelves lie hidden, filled with history's most delicate confessions. And somewhere among them, perhaps still locked in a forgotten drawer, rests the first letter that started it all. A simple message of faith written in an age before secrets. A letter that asked only to be remembered. In the early 1600s, when the night skies still belonged to faith, one man dared to claim it for reason. His name was Galileo Galilei, a mathematician, an observer, a quiet rebel, armed not with a sword, but with a telescope. Through polished glass, he gazed upon the heavens and saw what few before him had dared to believe, that the earth was not the center of God's creation. It moved, spinning through a vast and endless universe. What he saw was simple truth written in the stars, but in his time, truth was not a discovery. It was a decree, and the decree came from Rome. The Church had long been the keeper of the cosmos, shaping humanity's place beneath heaven's dome. To question that order was not just scientific rebellion, it was spiritual defiance. Galileo's telescope, no larger than a musket, became a weapon that threatened centuries of divine certainty. In 1616, whispers of his findings reached the Vatican. Cardinals debated, theologians frowned, and the Inquisition listened. To them, Galileo's universe was too dangerous, not because it was false, but because it was vast. A moving earth meant a moving God, and that was something faith was not prepared to follow. He was summoned to Rome, not as a heretic, not yet, but as a man to be reminded of his limits. Inside a candle-lit chamber, before men robed in crimson, Galileo stood alone. His words were calm, his reasoning clear. Yet the more he explained the harmony of nature's laws, the more they saw defiance. The trial was not about stars or motion. It was about who had the right to define truth, heaven or man. When the verdict came, it was not shouted. It was whispered. He was forbidden to teach, forbidden to write, forbidden to look upon the stars as he once had. And under threat of imprisonment, Galileo bowed his head and spoke the words history would never forget. I abjure, I curse, I detest my errors. They say that as he rose from his knees, he murmured beneath his breath, Et pur si muove. And yet, it moves. The Church had silenced the man, but not the motion. The earth still turned, and so did time. Galileo lived the rest of his years under house arrest, his body confined, but his mind unbroken. In secret, he continued to write, not in defiance, but in devotion to truth itself. His manuscripts, smuggled beyond Vatican walls, became seeds for a future that would no longer fear the stars. Centuries later, the Vatican quietly revisited his trial. The verdict was re-examined, the man restored to honor. In 1992, Pope John Paul II officially acknowledged the Church's error, a gesture of reconciliation between science and faith. But even then, beneath the apology, lingered the echo of an older question. Why must truth wait for permission to be heard? Galileo's story is not one of conflict between science and religion, but of humanity's struggle with its own reflection. Every age has its Galileo, a voice that sees beyond the horizon and a power that tells it to look away. And somewhere, beneath the frescoed ceilings of Rome, the same stars he once studied still shine through stained glass. They wait, indifferent and eternal, for the next soul brave enough to see them as they are, and to whisper once more, and yet it moves. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Vatican, where shadows gather like memories, lie shelves that have not seen sunlight for centuries. Among them rests a story of devotion and betrayal, written not in triumph, but in silence. The Knights Templar, warriors bound by faith, guardians of treasure and truth, once strode across Europe and the Holy Land with banners of crimson and white, their loyalty unquestioned, their purpose divine. Yet even the purest of orders can fall when power and fear conspire. In 1307, a chill swept across Christendom. Kings whispered to popes, coins changed hands in secret meetings. On a single October morning, the Templars were seized, their fortresses stormed, their brothers imprisoned, and their names condemned to infamy. Charges of heresy, blasphemy, and corruption were whispered into the ears of the faithful. Yet behind the accusations, the truth was far simpler. Power had grown fearful of power. The wealth and influence of the Templars had become intolerable. For decades, the story of their trials and executions unfolded in candle-lit courts and prison cells, far from public eyes. Torture extracted confessions that were not their own. Faith was twisted into law, loyalty into treason. By 1314, the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake, his cries swallowed by the wind and the silence of a world unwilling to listen. And yet, somewhere in the shadows of the Vatican, the truth was never forgotten. Hidden within the papal archives, behind layers of dust and locked doors, lies a confession that could have rewritten history. It was a document that acknowledged the innocence of the Templars, absolving them of the crimes they had been forced to confess. Forgiveness was granted, but only centuries too late to save the lives lost, the reputations shattered, and the order dissolved. The document speaks not only of exoneration, but of regret. A pope, writing long after the fires had gone cold, expressed sorrow for the wrongs committed under the guise of piety. It was a confession that history had almost buried entirely, a voice reaching across the centuries, asking the world to remember what was done in the name of God. What makes this revelation haunting is not merely the injustice itself, but its quiet reminder. The machinery of power moves slowly, and often, redemption comes only after the damage is done. The Knights Templar, once symbols of faith and courage, were forgotten by history's pages, forgiven in ink, yet lost to memory. Today, scholars and archivists speak in hushed tones of the Templar files, of letters and decrees sealed away from public knowledge. Each parchment carries the weight of 1,000 questions. Why were men condemned for faith? How easily does fear turn devotion into heresy? And most hauntingly, what truths lie hidden in the silent corridors of the Vatican, waiting for the light of curiosity to reach them? The story of the Templars is a mirror, reflecting humanity's own contradictions, our reverence for ideals, and our simultaneous fear of them. Their courage, their discipline, and their ultimate fate remind us that history is not merely written by the victors, but by those who survive to write at all. As the sunlight filters through stained glass high above, dust motes drift over the hidden shelves. Somewhere beneath the stone, the Templar files wait, patient as time itself. They whisper of loyalty betrayed, of innocence condemned, and of forgiveness granted in a world too late to witness it. And for those who listen closely, the files tell a secret that no fire, no decree, and no passage of centuries can truly erase. The Knights Templar, though forgotten, were never unworthy. The world was burning. In the 1930s and 40s, Europe had become a landscape of smoke and fear, where armies marched beneath banners drenched in ideology, and the cries of the innocent rose above the thunder of artillery. In the midst of this chaos, an unlikely correspondence unfolded, not in public squares, nor in the halls of governments, but in secret, folded letters sent between Rome and Berlin. The Vatican, ancient and silent, found itself at the crossroads of morality and survival. Popes had long wielded power quietly, influencing kings and emperors with a mixture of faith and diplomacy. But now, for the first time in centuries, the stakes were existential. Adolf Hitler, a man whose vision was as cold as it was ambitious, had risen in Germany, and his march across Europe left no space untouched by fear. Inside the papal chambers, letters were penned with deliberate care. Every word was measured, every phrase chosen to carry a double meaning. They were messages not only of survival, but of subtle negotiation, of faith entwined with pragmatism. The Vatican understood that a direct confrontation with the Reich could invite destruction, yet silence carried its own weight of complicity. In these coded words, diplomacy became an act of conscience, a tightrope between speaking for humanity and protecting the Church itself. Historians have pieced together fragments of this delicate exchange, references to humanitarian concerns, entreaties for mercy cloaked in spiritual language, requests for the protection of persecuted communities disguised as administrative matters. Each letter was a chess move, a silent battle between morality and fear. Behind the walls of marble and frescoes, men in white robes prayed not only for souls, but for the survival of those they could not openly defend. The Vatican's role during this era remains one of history's most debated mysteries. So, we see a moral compromise, a failure to speak loudly enough against atrocity. Others see a careful calculus, a strategy designed to save lives under impossible circumstances. Between Rome and Berlin, faith became a weapon as subtle as it was potent. Prayer and pen, secrecy and courage intertwined in a dance that history has only partially illuminated. Yet in these letters, there is also a quiet testimony to humanity's resilience. The Pope, confronted with the machinery of totalitarian power, did not abandon his duty. The correspondence reveals efforts to shelter the vulnerable, to guide the conscience of rulers, and to preserve the possibility of mercy in an age determined to crush it. Every folded page carries the weight of lives at stake, every inked word a whispered plea for survival. The story of these secret letters is not one of overt heroism, nor of grand gestures. It is a narrative of quiet courage, of moral negotiation under pressure, and of faith tested against the harshest of realities. The Vatican, as always, operated in shadows, but the shadows themselves tell a story. Of power balanced by conscience, of survival intertwined with principle, and of history's unfolding written not only in victories and defeats, but in the unseen decisions made in silent rooms. Even today, beneath the frescoed ceilings of the Vatican, the letters remain hidden. Their words, fragile and yellowed with age, whisper across time, a testament to the tension between duty and fear, morality and survival. And for those willing to listen, the story offers a lesson that resonates far beyond its era, that even in the darkest of times, faith can be both shield and guide, and that the choices made in silence can echo louder than any proclamation in the light. Beneath the polished marble floors of the Vatican, past corridors lined with silent echoes of prayer and power, lie rooms that no visitor has walked. Behind iron gates and triple-locked doors, in chambers untouched by the warmth of sunlight, rest paintings that the world was never meant to see. They are works of masters, their brushstrokes alive with the humanity that so often frightened their patrons. These paintings were hidden not because they lacked skill, but because they revealed too much. Faces that bore sorrow too raw, eyes that reflected doubt, despair, or forbidden longing. They exposed the fragility of those who believed themselves beyond human frailty. A saint's gaze that questioned divinity, a king's portrait that trembled with the weight of conscience, a nude draped in shadow yet clothed in truth. Each canvas held a story the Church feared might unravel its narrative. The vaults were assembled over centuries, a gallery of secrets where light barely touched the dust-laden frames. Scholars whispered of works by Caravaggio, Raphael, and others whose known masterpieces reveal only a fraction of their vision. But the paintings hidden here were different. They carried a rawness too intimate, too unsettling. Color was used not merely to beautify, but to confront. Shadows did not merely fall, they pressed upon the soul, demanding recognition of suffering and desire in a world that demanded purity and obedience. Some paintings depict saints with eyes that linger on the viewer, as though silently pleading for understanding. Others portray rulers whose expressions betray fear or regret, moments the annals of history erased. Here, the human condition is neither glorified nor condemned. It simply exists. And that existence, so honest and uncompromising, was considered dangerous. Why were these works hidden? Perhaps to protect the faithful from doubt. Perhaps to healed the Church from embarrassment. Perhaps because art in its purest form cannot be constrained by doctrine. These paintings are a testament to the tension between beauty and truth, between devotion and reality. They are reminders that those who wield power often fear reflection, particularly when it shows not perfection, but vulnerability. Occasionally, a curator or a trusted custodian glimpses a corner of these forbidden works. They speak of eyes that haunt the memory, of colors that refuse to fade, of figures that seem to breathe in the candlelight. And yet, for the world outside, these works remain invisible, their messages whispered only to those who walk in the corridors of silence. In these hidden rooms, the brush becomes a voice that was silenced, yes, but never erased. It speaks of passion, doubt, and humanity in a way that words cannot capture. For centuries, the Church controlled what could be seen, but these paintings remind us that truth has a stubborn persistence. It waits in shadows behind gates, in places too painful for the casual eye, ready to speak to those patient enough to listen. And so, the hidden paintings endure. They are eyes that watch history unfold from the darkness, waiting for the day when curiosity, courage, and reverence converge. They are not merely art. They are mirrors. Mirrors that reflect not what we want to see, but what we are, in all our light and our shadow. Beneath the silence of the vaults, the human soul waits to be recognized, and the eyes that were never shown continue to look back, unwavering and eternal. For centuries, the Vatican has been more than a sanctuary of faith. It has been a fulcrum of power, perched between thrones and crowns, where every blessing carried weight and every silence measured consequence. Its influence extended beyond altars and sermons, reaching into the chambers of kings, emperors, and generals, men who understood that divine favor was often the most potent currency of all. The corridors of papal palaces have long echoed with whispers that history will never record. Letters, sealed with wax and discretion, passed from Rome to royal courts. A single word of approval could legitimize a monarch, while a carefully withheld blessing could destabilize an entire kingdom. Faith was not only a personal creed, but a political instrument, wielded with subtlety and precision. During the Renaissance, as dynasties rose and fell, the Vatican's role as arbiter became clear. Kings and princes sought its counsel, not merely for spiritual guidance, but to secure legitimacy. Crowns rested uneasily on heads that feared the Church's judgment more than the swords of rivals. A papal envoy could shape alliances, influence wars, or broker peace, all under the veil of sacred purpose. The Church's blessing was both shield and sword, its silence a verdict that could echo for generations. Yet this power was never absolute. Behind the ritual and ceremony, human ambition clashed with spiritual authority. Some rulers sought to bend the Church to their will, offering wealth and favors in exchange for endorsement. Others confronted the Vatican with subtle threats, leveraging armies and mercenaries to challenge its influence. The dance between temporal power and spiritual oversight was delicate, choreographed over centuries with cautious diplomacy, coded language, and the unspoken knowledge that misstep could invite ruin. Within the Vatican, decisions were made in quiet rooms, away from public gaze. Cardinals debated, envoys reported, and the Pope himself weighed not only the moral but the strategic implications of each action. A war could be averted by a sentence written in ink, an alliance secured by a discreet envoy carrying a blessing, and a kingdom's fate altered by a decision made in candlelight. Faith and politics intertwined so completely that history often mistook diplomacy for divine will. The legacy of these whispers is etched into Europe's history. Battles won or lost, treaties signed or broken, and dynasties preserved or toppled, all bore the subtle imprint of the Vatican's intervention. Yet few outside the walls understood the precision required to maintain this balance. Too much influence, and the Church would appear as a tyrant. Too little, and kingdoms could crumble unchecked. Even today, the echoes of those centuries resonate. In state visits and private audiences, modern popes continue the ancient practice of measured influence. The Vatican's power has evolved, but the principle remains. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than proclamation, and a whispered word can shape the course of nations. In the end, the story of faith and empire is a story of restraint and foresight. It is a testament to the enduring tension between the sacred and the secular, the eternal and the temporal. For centuries, the Vatican has existed as both witness and participant, its blessings a weapon, its silence a verdict, and its influence a quiet force that continues to ripple across the world, unseen yet profoundly felt. In the age of exploration, when the horizon seemed endless and the seas held secrets untold, the Vatican found itself holding a quill heavier than any sword. Across oceans yet to be charted, continents waited in silence, their mountains, rivers, and forests untouched by European claim. And yet, in candle-lit chambers far from the unknown, men in white robes began to draw lines on parchment, lines that would divide the world in the name of God. The act was deliberate, meticulous, and quietly absolute. Through papal bulls and decrees, the Church sanctioned voyages of conquest and colonization, granting Spain and Portugal dominion over lands they had never seen. These documents were more than legal instruments. They were symbols of cosmic authority, declaring that God's chosen could claim, convert, and command in distant worlds. The map, once drawn, transformed the unknown into possession, yet it did so without consulting those who had already lived upon the land for centuries. It was a world witnessed not by the heavens themselves, but by men who assumed dominion over both heaven and earth. Mountains and rivers, forests and plains became points on a chart, their value measured in gold, spices, and souls. Yet the skies above remained indifferent, stars shining as they had for millennia, silent observers of human ambition. The heavens had no allegiance to borders or crowns. They watched as men moved continents on paper, but not in reality. The Church's cartographers and scribes worked with precision, translating divine mandate into lines and coordinates. Every decree was framed with sanctity, invoking God's will to justify conquest and claiming moral authority over the human cost of expansion. Letters were sent, treaties drafted, and explorers commissioned, all under the shadow of faith, a faith that justified both salvation and subjugation. Yet in these acts of authority, there lingered tension, morality and ambition intertwined in a delicate dance. While some in Rome saw these decrees as divine guidance, others quietly questioned the human cost. Letters smuggled across oceans speak of missionaries who wept at the suffering they witnessed, torn between duty and conscience. The Church, as ever, moved cautiously, its influence absolute, yet its conscience aware, if quietly so. In hindsight, these decisions shaped the course of civilizations. The world, as it is known today, bears the invisible ink of papal authority. Borders, colonies, and nations were born not just through conquest and exploration, but through the silent stroke of a quill, through decrees whispered into the corridors of power. History often remembers the explorers and kings, yet the Church's hand in crafting the map of the world remains its most enduring, if invisible, legacy. And somewhere, above the earth, they claimed, the stars continued their quiet orbit. They did not recognize crowns, nor the inked lines of a map. They observed the unfolding of human ambition with impartiality, as they had for eons. The heavens bore witness to the audacity of men who sought to divide what was never theirs to claim, and in their silent presence, the universe seemed to ask the oldest of questions: By what authority do mortals decide the fate of the world? The Church drew the map of the earth, but the cosmos remained undivided, a reminder that human dominion is always provisional, and that power, even when sanctified, is fleeting. And in that quiet contradiction, between heaven's eternity and man's transient decree, lies the story of exploration, faith, and the limits of authority, inked forever on parchment, yet forever questioned by the stars. Across oceans uncharted and forests untouched, the new world stretched in silence, its mountains and rivers unaware of the ambitions that sailed toward them. Yet with the arrival of European ships came more than explorers and soldiers. They brought faith entwined with power, a doctrine carried on sails and swords alike. In this age, salvation was inseparable from conquest, and the ink of papal decrees met the blood of indigenous lives. Missionaries arrived with hope in their hearts, but letters preserved in the Vatican reveal the shadows behind their devotion. They wrote of sorrow that weighed heavier than gold, of communities uprooted, of children and elders swept into fear and submission. Their hands trembled as they recorded the collision of belief and empire, as prayers and politics merged into an unholy union. Some wrote that they wept for the souls they sought to save, aware that salvation was being purchased not with compassion, but with silence and compliance. The Church's presence, though cloaked in the promise of eternal life, often acted as an accomplice to imperial ambition. Mission stations became footholds for colonial authority. Baptism was both blessing and claim. Letters speak of indigenous leaders pleading for mercy, their voices recorded only in cursive ink on parchment, far from the world that could have heard them. Those who raised their hands in prayer were also subjected to laws written in foreign tongues, their lands divided, their ways erased, all in the name of God's protection. Yet the sorrow recorded by missionaries was not mere guilt. It was a recognition of the paradox that defined their work. They sought to illuminate the divine, to bring light to those in darkness. Yet they were also instruments of violence, witnesses to destruction. Their writings reveal sleepless nights, prayers whispered over the bodies of the fallen, and tears shed in solitude as faith became entangled with power. Every cross erected in the New World carried both hope and tragedy, a reminder that salvation, when entwined with authority, is never without cost. The letters reveal the human heart caught between duty and conscience. One priest recounts standing over a village scarred by conquest, his voice breaking as he prayed for mercy while soldiers enforced obedience. Another wrote of a community that clung to its rituals even as European banners claimed their soil, marveling at their resilience even while lamenting the impossibility of protecting them fully. The narrative of faith in this era is inseparable from the narrative of suffering. To witness one is to witness the other. Even today, the blood of the New World echoes in the archives of Rome. Each letter is a testament to the weight of history, a record of the human cost hidden behind devotion and decree. The stories speak not only of conquest, but of conscience, of missionaries who carried both compassion and complicity, of a church grappling with the consequences of its influence. In the forests, rivers, and mountains of the Americas, the echoes of that age endure. Civilization was rewritten in ink and blood, and yet beneath the surface the memory of those lost and the grief of those who survived remain. Faith and empire were bound together, and the cost was borne in silence. The story of the New World reminds us that salvation, when bought with silence and power, is a fragile and contested thing. It is a lesson in the collision of ideals and reality, and a testament to the enduring tension between belief, conscience, and authority. The letters remain, faint yet unbroken, whispering across centuries, that even in the name of God, humanity must reckon with its own actions, its own sorrow, and the lives forever altered by the march of empire. The world had descended into fire. Cities smouldered under relentless bombardment, and the cries of the innocent rose above the din of war. In the midst of this chaos, a figure in white robes moved quietly through the halls of the Vatican. the weight of centuries pressing upon his shoulders. Pope Pius XII, the shepherd of a church whose influence spanned continents, found himself confronting a question that no doctrine could fully answer. When the world burns, does one speak and risk everything, or remain silent to preserve what still survives? The Vatican, long a sanctuary of wisdom and diplomacy, became an island of quiet observation. Reports of atrocities filtered in from across Europe, letters from the faithful, whispers of the desperate, accounts of unspeakable horrors. Each note was a spark, a flicker of truth demanding attention. And yet, for every word of despair, there was the silent calculation of consequences, the lives that could be saved by caution, the Church's role in a continent poised on the brink of annihilation. History has debated his silence. Critics accuse him of inaction, of moral compromise in the face of evil. Yet inside the Vatican, in candle-lit chambers, decisions were made with careful precision. Shelters were prepared, secret passages opened, and countless lives, Jews, refugees, the hunted and the hidden, were saved through quiet intervention. The Pope's public voice may have been measured, restrained, but his actions resonated in the hidden corridors of humanity, in the choices that could not be broadcast without imperiling even more lives. In letters smuggled from Rome, priests described clandestine networks of aid, rations delivered under the cover of night, false documents handed to those fleeing persecution, and sanctuaries maintained in silence. Faith became both shield and compass, guiding decisions that balanced morality against survival. The Church walked a tightrope between visibility and discretion, its power leveraged to preserve what hope remained. Even as bombs fell and regimes marched, the Vatican's chambers were filled with prayer, not only for the Church, but for the world it watched, helpless in public, yet vigilant in secret. The Pope knelt in solitude, torn between the moral imperative to speak and the practical necessity to act quietly. Each decision was haunted by the knowledge that a single misstep could tip the balance from preservation to catastrophe. History remembers the wars, the battles, the visible acts of courage and terror. But within the shadows of Rome, another story unfolded, one of quiet heroism, moral complexity, and human endurance. The Pope of Silence bore witness not only to destruction, but to resilience, choosing actions that could not be shouted from rooftops, knowing that the world might never fully see them. By the time the guns fell silent, the cost of war was written in the faces of survivors and the ashes of cities. Yet beneath the frescoed ceilings of the Vatican, lives had been spared. Networks of mercy had persisted, and a faith tested by fire had endured. The moral ambiguity of silence remained, a shadow that history continues to grapple with. The Pope of Silence stands as a testament to the difficult calculus of conscience, when speaking might destroy and silence might save. In the quiet of the Vatican, prayers and actions intertwined, leaving a legacy of lives protected in secrecy. Courage measured not in public acclaim, but in the preservation of humanity itself. And in that tension between speech and silence, faith and pragmatism, the Church bore witness to the most enduring question of all: how does one act rightly in a world ablaze? The world had shifted once more. The guns of World War II were silent, yet a new tension gripped the globe. Invisible, relentless, and far more insidious. The Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, dividing nations, families, and ideologies. Borders became barriers not only of territory, but of belief. And in the midst of this silent war, the Vatican found itself wielding a weapon unlike any other: faith. No armies marched beneath its banners, no cannons roared from its walls. Instead, the Church relied on whispers and influence, on prayer and diplomacy, on networks that spanned cities and continents. Popes understood that in a world threatened by totalitarianism and atheistic ideology, the soul of nations could be defended without shedding blood. Every gesture, every letter, every discreet meeting carried strategic weight. Faith itself became a shield, a sword, and a negotiation table rolled into one. From the streets of Warsaw to the squares of Budapest, the Vatican's presence was felt quietly but undeniably. Priests and bishops operated under watchful eyes, carrying messages of hope, guidance, and subtle resistance. The Church's emissaries navigated the labyrinth of surveillance, oppression, and fear, acting as both spiritual leaders and clandestine diplomats. Letters smuggled through cities, coded signals passed in sermons, and discreet interventions at the highest levels of government all formed part of a delicate strategy. The objective was clear: preserve belief, nurture conscience, and protect the fragile human spirit in a world increasingly dominated by ideology. The Cold War tested the Church in ways no battlefield ever could. Decisions had to be made with precision, for a single misstep could bring down regimes or endanger the lives of those under surveillance. Faith was no longer only a matter of salvation. It became a language of negotiation, a currency in the contest for influence. The Vatican did not seek to conquer, yet it had the power to shape outcomes, to inspire resistance, and to stand as a moral compass when secular authorities faltered. The popes of this era acted with a quiet courage born of centuries of experience. They knew that overt confrontation could lead to annihilation, but silence carried its own risks: the slow erosion of conscience, the despair of those living under oppression. Their choice was subtle yet profound: act through networks of trust, through messages hidden in plain sight, through faith wielded with intention and patience. Prayer became strategy, devotion became diplomacy, silence, when necessary, became a shield. In retrospect, the Cold War cross was not a battle of bullets, but of belief. The Church's influence helped nurture movements of conscience, emboldened those who resisted totalitarian control, and preserved hope where hope seemed impossible. Its victories were measured not in territory gained, but in lives spared, spirits strengthened, and the persistence of faith under pressure. Even today, the echoes of those decades linger in the Vatican's archives. Letters never published, messages carefully delivered, interventions remembered only in whispers. They tell a story of power exercised with restraint, of faith as a weapon wielded not to dominate, but to protect. And in those quiet corridors of history, the Church reminds us that influence need not roar to be heard, that in an age of fear, courage may take the form of patience, prayer, and subtle resolve. The Cold War cross stands as a testament to an unseen struggle, where belief itself became both shield and sword, and where the Vatican, silent yet resolute, continued its timeless work, guiding humanity not with force, but with conscience, vigilance, and the enduring power of faith. Behind the halo of sanctity, behind frescoed ceilings and gilded altars, lies a shadow that few dare to speak of. The Church, keeper of faith and conscience for centuries, also harbored secrets: files marked "Do Not Open," scrolls that whispered of sins never confessed, of power misused, and of humanity betrayed. These were not tales of fleeting weakness, but of choices etched in ink and preserved in silence. And though the doors are locked, the ink still bleeds. The Vatican, in its pursuit of divine authority, maintained records of every scandal, every accusation, every moral failure it deemed too dangerous for the world to see. Behind layers of secrecy, the faithful sometimes became pawns, the vulnerable victims of systems designed to protect the institution rather than the individual. Letters, reports, and internal investigations reveal the quiet, often cold calculus of power. Decisions made to preserve reputation, to shield hierarchy, and to silence voices that might disrupt the carefully maintained order. Historians who have glimpsed these archives speak of stories both tragic and infuriating. Accounts of corruption, of manipulation, of cover-ups carefully hidden behind layers of bureaucracy. The sins are not merely personal lapses. They are structural, institutional, and enduring, written with the same precision and permanence that once chronicled acts of devotion. And though they were meant to remain invisible, the traces of human suffering seep through the parchment, refusing to be entirely contained. Yet the Church was not uniform in its concealment. Within its walls, there were those who wrestled with conscience, cardinals, priests, and clerics, who recorded the truth even as they were forced to hide it. Their writings are hesitant, fragmented, but real. They remind us that even in the most imposing institutions, humanity persists. In doubt, in grief, in it attempts at atonement. What is haunting is not simply the wrongdoing itself, but the weight of its concealment. These files, stored in the deepest vaults, are silent witnesses to the tension between faith and power, between doctrine and morality. For centuries the Church controlled the narrative, choosing which stories would be told and which would vanish into shadows. And yet the ink remains stubborn, a testament to the fact that truth, no matter how carefully suppressed, leaves a mark. The sins recorded in these archives are mirrors. They reflect the fragility of human nature, even within institutions claiming divine guidance. They remind us that holiness and power, when intertwined, can obscure as much as they illuminate. The Church's halo, radiant to the faithful, casts shadows long enough to conceal centuries of unspoken history. And still, there is a paradox. Beneath the weight of secrecy, the Church continues to endure. Its teachings inspire millions, its rituals bring comfort, and its walls hold beauty and devotion. But the hidden records serve as a quiet counterpoint, a reminder that institutions, no matter how sacred, are made of human hands, and that every power carries with it the responsibility to reckon with its own shadow. In the end, the story of the Church's untold crimes is not merely one of scandal or shame. It is a story of human complexity, of the tension between devotion and authority, and of the ink that bleeds even in silence. Behind the halo lies a truth that endures, a quiet, persistent reminder that faith, morality, and power are never as separate as we wish them to be. And for those willing to look beyond the light, the shadows speak, patient, unrelenting, and eternal. Beneath layers of dust, behind shelves that have not been disturbed for centuries, lie fragments of a story the world was never meant to hear. Ancient pages, written by hands long turned to dust, whisper of voices silenced by history, words that spoke not only of God, but of the divine spark within every human being. These lost scriptures were never canonized, never read aloud in cathedrals, yet their echoes survive, fragile yet persistent, waiting for those willing to listen. They were gospels that dared to diverge from orthodoxy, letters and hymns that celebrated the presence of divinity within the ordinary, that revealed a God not distant and unyielding, but intimate, compassionate, and immanent. Some spoke of miracles in the lives of the humble, of revelation in the moments of quiet contemplation, of wisdom accessible not through ritual alone, but through conscience, action, and understanding. These texts were radical in their simplicity, revolutionary in their recognition of human potential. Yet for centuries, such words were deemed dangerous. What threatened the Church was not falsehood, but freedom. The freedom of individuals to see divinity within themselves, rather than solely through the mediation of priests or doctrine. The scribes and prophets who recorded these ideas were careful, yet their work was often suppressed, hidden, or destroyed. Fires consumed their manuscripts, decrees banned their teachings, and history largely forgot their names. Even in the silence, however, the lost scriptures persisted. Copies were hidden in monasteries, secreted away in libraries, or tucked into private collections, their messages surviving in whispers. Scholars who have uncovered fragments speak of astonishing clarity, of metaphors and parables that resonate as profoundly today as they did when first written. Each recovered line is a reminder that knowledge, once shed, cannot be entirely extinguished. The content of these texts is remarkable in its humanity. They describe not only the divine but the ordinary, the grief of a parent, the wonder of a child, the quiet courage of a person facing suffering. They suggest that God's presence is reflected in acts of compassion, in thoughtfulness, in the courage to act rightly, a theology that elevates the human as well as the sacred. To read them is to confront a perspective once considered too liberating, too empowering, and therefore too threatening to endure openly. The lost scriptures are also a testament to the resilience of ideas. Though suppressed, their influence seeped into the margins of culture, inspiring mystics, poets, and thinkers who recognize the sacred within the human experience. Their language, though obscured, continues to shape thought, philosophy, and spirituality, reminding us that truth is rarely annihilated. It may only be delayed, whispered until the world is ready to hear. In the quiet corridors of the Vatican and the forgotten libraries of Europe, the fragments remain, patient and silent, as if waiting for the next generation of seekers. They ask a question that resonates across time. What is the cost of silencing a voice that sees divinity in every human being? And what is the reward for those brave enough to listen? The lost scriptures, though hidden, offer a vision that transcends history. A world in which faith recognizes the sacred within, where revelation is not imposed but discovered, and where the divine is not distant but close enough to be felt in every act of understanding, compassion, and love. They are a reminder that even when history tries to erase a voice, truth has a way of surviving. Ink may fade, parchments may crumble, but the ideas endure, waiting for eyes willing to see and hearts willing to receive. In libraries once grand, in archives sealed against the curious, there lie remnants of words that the world was never meant to read. From Galileo's manuscripts to the verses of poets deemed too dangerous, the Church for centuries drew lines between knowledge and heresy, and in doing so, it ignited fires meant to obliterate dissent. Yet even as flames devoured paper and ink, traces remained, whispers of truth that refused to be silenced. Books are more than ink on parchment. They are vessels of thought, daring to question, to imagine, to illuminate the unseen. Galileo's writings, for instance, challenged the very order of the cosmos. He described a universe in motion, one where Earth was not the center, but a planet among countless others. For the Church, this was not merely science, it was defiance. And so the Inquisition sought to suppress, to declare forbidden what was yet unproven, fearing that the spread of knowledge might unravel centuries of sacred certainty. Poets, philosophers, and historians faced similar fates. Their words dared to explore human nature, question authority, or celebrate passions deemed unworthy of public gaze. They were burned, banned, or buried beneath layers of silence. Each act of censorship was a desperate attempt to preserve order, to control the boundaries of belief, to dictate what could be thought as much as what could be prayed. Yet fire, while consuming, cannot entirely destroy. Ashes tell stories. Charred fragments preserve glimpses of ideas, smudges of rebellion, hints of imagination that refuse erasure. Scholars, centuries later, painstakingly reconstructed texts, piecing together arguments, philosophies, and revelations from the remnants. Knowledge, it seems, carries a stubborn persistence, a resilience that no decree can fully suppress. The books that survived the Church's censure often travelled in shadows, hidden in monasteries. Smuggled across borders, whispered about in secret. They were carried in the minds of those willing to risk peril for thought, memorized, copied clandestinely, and shared under the cover of night. In these acts of quiet defiance, knowledge became immortal, unbound by fire or fear. This history reminds us of the delicate tension between power and curiosity. Every attempt to suppress thought was also an acknowledgement of its potency. The Church burned books not solely out of malice, but because ideas have the power to illuminate, to destabilize, to transform perception. And in that tension lies the paradox of human progress. The very knowledge that challenges authority often becomes the foundation of future understanding. Today, the surviving manuscripts, fragile, yellowed, and carefully preserved, testify to both the fragility and resilience of human thought. They bear the scars of history, yet their light endures. Galileo's telescopic sketches, the forbidden verses of poets, the philosophical treatises once condemned, all speak of minds unafraid to see beyond the boundaries imposed by power. Every page, every line, is a reminder that while authority may seek to extinguish thought, the human drive to know, to question, and to imagine cannot be fully contained. The story of the books the Church tried to erase is a story of endurance. It is the tale of knowledge as both threat and treasure, of fire and ashes, of truth that insists on existing even when all else seems lost. And in that persistence we find hope, that even when the world attempts to silence thought, every trace of light left behind may one day illuminate paths unimagined, inspiring generations to look beyond fear and witness the brilliance that refuses to die. Long before the frescoed ceilings and the gilded altars, before the popes and cardinals took their place in history, there were hands quietly at work, shaping the very foundation of faith. These were the hands of women, invisible yet indispensable, whose devotion stitched together the words of Scripture, whose prayers sustained the heart of a church that often overlooked their presence. Their labor was silent, their contributions unrecorded, yet without them, the edifice of faith might have crumbled under its own weight. In dimly lit chambers, cloisters filled with the scent of ink and parchment, women copied sacred texts with painstaking care. Each letter was measured, each line carefully drawn, ensuring that the word of God would endure across centuries. Mistakes could not be tolerated. A miswritten syllable might distort meaning. And so, they worked tirelessly, day after day, their devotion manifest in the rhythm of quills, the turning of vellum, the quiet diligence that history rarely acknowledged. Their influence extended beyond manuscripts. They were the keepers of ritual, the quiet custodians of prayer, sustaining communities through the cycles of hope and despair that define spiritual life. In times of plague, war, or persecution, their prayers and vigilance became the invisible thread holding faith together, binding souls to the Church even when public structures faltered. Yet, despite their essential role, their names were left unwritten, their contributions subsumed beneath the grand narrative of male authority. Some of these women were nuns, cloistered and devoted, working in service to God and to knowledge. Others were laywomen, scholars and scribes, whose talents allowed sacred texts to survive when storms of history threatened them. Their hands were steady, their eyes trained for detail, and their hearts committed to a vision larger than themselves. And in that commitment they forged a quiet legacy, a testament not in monuments or titles, but in the enduring words of Scripture itself. The margins of history are where they dwell. References to their labor are often incidental, footnotes to the lives of men whose names dominate the archives. Yet a closer look reveals their impact. Texts preserved through centuries, prayers whispered in times of fear, communities sustained against overwhelming odds. They are present in every illuminated manuscript, every carefully bound folio, every whispered chant that echoes through the chapels of Rome. Their story is one of resilience and devotion, of creativity bound by discipline, and of voices that shaped faith without recognition. They remind us that history is rarely as comprehensive as it seems, that what is celebrated in public memory is often only a fraction of what truly shaped the world. And in acknowledging their presence, we uncover a fuller, richer narrative, one in which women were not merely spectators of faith, but its indispensable architects. Today, when manuscripts are studied and ancient texts preserved, there is a growing recognition of these hidden hands. Scholars trace the delicate flourishes of ink, the consistent precision of copying, the subtle notes that reveal devotion beyond duty. These women, once invisible, now emerge, not as footnotes, but as central figures in the story of faith. Their labor reminds us that the foundations of civilization are often laid by those whose names are never recorded, whose presence is felt only in the work they leave behind. The hidden women of the Vatican continue to speak across the centuries. Their stories, though obscured, whisper in the margins, a reminder that faith is more than monuments, more than decrees, more than titles. It is the quiet, steady devotion of those who labor without recognition, who preserve what is sacred through diligence, love, and faith. They are the unseen custodians of history, and in their silence they shout the most end, luring truth of all, that the soul of a community is often held together by those whose names will never appear in its chronicles. Behind the towering walls of the Vatican, far from public view, decisions were made that shaped the fate of nations. The popes, robed in white and surrounded by centuries of sacred tradition, wielded a power that was subtle, invisible, and relentless. They did not march armies, nor raise banners of conquest, yet their influence reached across continents, guided not by force, but by ink and whispers. Faith became their language, diplomacy their art, and prayer the quiet instrument of strategy. The corridors of power were lined with letters, treaties, and carefully coded messages. Diplomats came and went, bringing appeals from kings and ministers, each one seeking guidance or favor from the spiritual authority seated at the heart of Christendom. Popes listened, weighed, and responded, sometimes with blessing, sometimes with silence, each choice calculated to preserve the delicate balance between morality and ambition. Even a single word, a signature, or the subtle shift of tone could tilt the scales of war or peace. From the courts of Europe to the palaces of the New World, the Church operated in layers of discretion. Alliances were brokered in candle-lit chambers, decisions recorded in manuscripts hidden from public eye, and messages conveyed in ways that only those fluent in the Vatican's language could understand. Faith was a tool of persuasion, a moral compass to influence rulers, and a shield to protect the vulnerable, all while preserving the Church's authority. The popes understood that their role was as much spiritual as it was political. Every decree, every diplomatic intervention carried the weight of divine legitimacy. They guided monarchs, advised statesmen, and mediated disputes, always aware that their power relied on belief. The belief that God's representative on earth could discern what human judgment alone might not. Their diplomacy was both invisibly and absolute, a blend of conscience, strategy, and vision that few outside the Vatican could comprehend. At times, the Church intervened to prevent war, at others to preserve influence, and sometimes to protect its faithful from oppression. The lines between morality and pragmatism blurred, yet always the underlying principle remained: the preservation of both faith and the fragile order of the world. Popes acted not as mere spectators, but as architects of historical currents, shaping outcomes with a quiet authority that history often overlooks. The Vatican's archives tell the story in fragments: letters that negotiated peace, missives that quelled rebellion, and correspondences that ensured the survival of communities threatened by violence or tyranny. These documents reveal a Church acutely aware of its responsibilities and its limits. Its power was profound, but it was exercised with caution, patience, and foresight, recognizing that visible force could destroy, while subtle influence could endure. Even today, the secret diplomacy of popes resonates. Nations shaped by treaties, leaders guided by moral counsel, and decisions that altered the course of history bear the quiet imprint of the Vatican's hand. It is a testament to the enduring tension between faith and politics, between divine authority and human ambition. The popes wielded influence not with swords, but with the certainty that belief itself could steer empires. In the end, the story of faith and power is a story of restraint, strategy, and vision. Behind closed doors, the Church shaped nations in ways few will ever know, weaving morality and diplomacy, prayer and persuasion into a tapestry of influence that stretches across centuries. The ink of its decisions, once hidden in shadows, still echoes in the halls of history, a reminder that the true power of faith lies not in spectacle, but in its quiet, enduring capacity to shape the world. Within the walls of the Vatican, behind doors that have remained closed for centuries, a ritual unfolds that few outside these sacred chambers will ever witness. In candlelight, with shadows flickering against frescoed ceilings, men in red robes gather to choose the next pope, the voice of God on earth. Their deliberations are hidden, their words guarded, their oaths sacred. What occurs inside the conclave is both a ceremony of faith and a study in secrecy, a delicate dance between divine guidance and human decision. The conclave is a world apart, removed from the corridors of power, yet its significance resonates across the globe. Cardinals are sequestered, cut off from the outside world, their lives compressed into a space defined by ritual and reflection. The air is heavy with incense and expectation. Each participant carries the weight of centuries of tradition, of predecessors whose choices shaped the fate of nations and the destiny of the Church itself. The selection of a pope is not merely an election, it is a covenant, a sacred responsibility that demands both discernment and devotion. In this cloistered world, the rules are absolute. Coded oaths bind the cardinals, their voices silenced outside the chamber. Even the faintest whisper beyond the walls is forbidden, a breach that carries both spiritual and institutional consequence. The secrecy is not arbitrary. It is designed to protect the integrity of the decision, to shield it from influence, ambition, or fear. Here, faith alone guides the hand and the heart, and each vote is cast in solemn recognition of the weight it carries. The rituals themselves are ancient. Each gesture, each word, is laden with meaning. Candles illuminate faces lined with devotion and responsibility. The ballots are counted with meticulous care, repeated again and again until consensus emerges. Moments of reflection and prayer punctuate the process, reminding those gathered that their choice is not theirs alone, but part of a larger, divine narrative. In these hours, the human and the sacred are intertwined, and the future of the Church hangs in balance, unseen, yet profoundly consequential. Outside the conclave, the world waits, unaware of the deliberations that will shape its spiritual landscape. Speculation thrives, but the truth remains hidden. History has taught that the Church's greatest decisions are often made in silence, in rooms that seem ordinary, yet are imbued with extraordinary purpose. The secrecy preserves not only the process, but the faith of billions who look to the Church for guidance, hope, and continuity. The conclave is also a reflection of the human heart. Ambition, wisdom, doubt, and devotion converge, tested by tradition and tempered by conscience. The cardinals must navigate personal conviction, the demands of history, and the call of divine guidance. Every decision is a balance between earthly judgment and spiritual discernment, a negotiation of conscience that few will ever understand, and fewer still will witness. When the white smoke rises from the Sistine Chapel chimney, it signals the choice has been made. A new pope is revealed to the world, the culmination of days of prayer, debate, and secrecy. The rituals, the oaths, the hidden deliberations, they remain unseen, their significance whispered only among those who participated. And yet, their impact is profound, echoing across the globe in the lives of millions. Inside the conclave, faith and secrecy are inseparable. It is a place where human deliberation meets divine expectation, where history is written not in public record, but in the quiet, unbroken discipline of tradition. The rituals no one sees are not merely ceremonies. They are the heartbeat of a church that has endured for centuries, a reminder that some truths, though hidden, carry a weight heavier than any crown or decree. Beneath the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica, behind marble walls and gilded doors, lies a world where devotion meets gold. The Vatican Bank, an institution as secretive as it is powerful, has long been the repository of wealth, influence, and at times, controversy. It is a place where faith and finance intersect, where the Church's mission of charity is entwined with the accumulation of capital, and where the price of secrecy has often been paid in quiet scandal. From its earliest days, the Vatican understood the necessity of financial stability. Tithes, donations, and legacies flowed into its coffers, supporting the work of the Church around the globe. Hospitals, schools, and missions depended on this wealth, and yet the accumulation of capital also opened doors to questions, intrigue, and ambition. How to steward immense resources while remaining true to spiritual calling became a question as old as the institution itself. The bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, operated under a veil of discretion. Accounts were opened and closed quietly, transfers executed with precision, and records maintained behind locked doors. Its clientele included religious orders, charitable foundations, and private individuals, each trusting the institution to safeguard not only their money, but their intentions. Yet the opacity of its operations invited suspicion, and over decades, whispers of mismanagement, corruption, and scandal would occasionally pierce the marble silence. Some scandals were spectacular: embezzlements, money laundering, ties to covert political maneuvers, while others were subtler, hidden in the shadowy balance between charity and investment. Each episode revealed the tension at the heart of the Church's financial empire, how to wield temporal power without compromising spiritual authority. And yet, even in controversy, the Vatican persisted, learning, adapting, and maintaining its influence over both spiritual and temporal affairs. The bank's wealth was not merely numerical, it was symbolic. Gold and securities became instruments of diplomacy, loans facilitated missions in distant lands, and discreet transfers safeguarded communities threatened by political instability. Every coin and contract carried dual significance: the material and the moral, the earthly and the spiritual. In this way, the Vatican Bank became a mirror of the Church itself, devoted to higher ideals, yet inexorably entangled with the realities of human ambition and desire. For decades, investigative journalists and scholars have sought to unravel its mysteries. Yet, much remains obscured, hidden by layers of secrecy designed to protect both institution and faith. The stories that emerge are tantalizing glimpses, letters, audits, and testimonies that suggest a world where holy mission and human frailty intersect, where devotion may justify discretion, and where faith at times is asked to bear the weight of silence. Despite the shadows, the Church's financial apparatus has enabled remarkable good. Hospitals continue to heal, schools continue to educate, missions continue to serve the poor, all funded in part through the very mechanisms that remain hidden from public scrutiny. The Vatican Bank, in its complexity and secrecy, illustrates the duality of power: a tool for protection and for scandal, a means of sustaining faith and challenging it, a reminder that institutions are as human as the individuals who manage them. In the end, the story of the Vatican Bank is more than one of wealth and scandal. It is a story of human ambition intersecting with spiritual mission, of secrecy balanced against transparency, and of faith's enduring capacity to guide, constrain, and sometimes complicate the use of power. Between devotees, on and gold, the Church built not only an empire of finance, but a testament to the paradoxes of stewardship, and the price that faith itself must sometimes pay. For centuries, the Vatican did more than record history. It curated it. Shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, manuscripts stacked in careful order, and rooms sealed against the curious became guardians of a particular kind of power: the power to decide which words could live and which must be erased. The Index of Forbidden Books. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum was not merely a list. It was a statement, a warning, and a judgment. It delineated the boundaries of thought, marking ideas that, in the eyes of the Church, could threaten both faith and order. To read from the Index was to confront danger. Poets, philosophers, and scientists found their works condemned, not necessarily for falsehood, but for audacity, for daring to question authority, to explore forbidden truths, or to illuminate facets of human experience deemed too dangerous for the faithful. Galileo's writings, Giordano Bruno's cosmological musings, the provocative words of Renaissance thinkers, all were caught in the sweep of suppression. Every sentence barred was a reflection of fear, and every prohibited book a mirror of the power that knowledge could wield. The act of forbidding was itself a form of preservation. By controlling the spread of ideas, the Church sought to maintain spiritual equilibrium, to shield communities from concepts considered subversive. Yet in seeking to erase knowledge, the Index often achieved the opposite. Forbidden texts became legendary, whispered about in secret gatherings, copied clandestinely, and circulated under the shadow of risk. What was censored gained allure, and what was hidden became more compelling precisely because it was denied. The Index was more than a catalogue of controversy. It was a testament to the tension between human curiosity and institutional authority. It reminds us that the written word carries power to inspire, to destabilize, to challenge, and to transform. Ideas were not prohibited lightly. Scholars, theologians, and clerics debated each entry, weighing potential harm against truth, morality against knowledge, obedience against discovery. The Index was both an instrument of caution and a chronicle of the limits of control. Even today, its legacy persists. While the formal Index was abolished in the 20th century, its influence lingers in the meticulous care with which ideas are judged, classified, and permitted. The shelves of the Vatican still whisper of texts that were once banned, their pages preserved despite centuries of attempted erasure. To wander among them is to feel the weight of forbidden thought, the echo of ideas that were silenced but not destroyed. The story of the Index is also a story of human resilience. Scholars, translators, and scribes risked censure to preserve what was deemed dangerous. Hidden manuscripts, secret annotations, and coded correspondence ensured that knowledge, even under threat, endured. Fire and decree could attempt to obliterate ideas, but the human mind, ever curious and inventive, found ways to carry them forward. Ultimately, the Index of Forbidden Knowledge is more than a record of restriction. It is a testament to the enduring struggle between authority and inquiry, between obedience and enlightenment. It reminds us that some truths are too powerful to remain hidden indefinitely, and that even in silence, forbidden words can shape thought, inspire action, and echo across centuries. The shelves still remember. They hold within them the memories of voices we were never meant to hear, daring, questioning, and alive. And in that silence, in the quiet vigilance of ink and parchment, the Index speaks. Of the fear of knowledge, the persistence of thought, and the enduring human desire to read, to learn, and ultimately to understand. In the shadowed corridors of history, the Crusades emerge not merely as battles over land, but as a collision of faith, power, and ambition. Under the banner of holiness, legions marched across deserts and rivers, their swords raised in the name of God, their hearts inflamed with conviction. Jerusalem, the city of sacred promise, became the focal point of a struggle that would engulf continents and centuries alike. Yet what began as a mission of devotion soon became a theatre of conquest, where faith and violence were intertwined in ways that history rarely fully acknowledges. The call to arms was framed in spiritual urgency. Popes proclaimed that salvation could be earned on the battlefield, that the blood of the faithful could redeem both soul and kingdom. Knights and nobles, motivated by devotion, duty, and sometimes ambition, rallied to the cause. But the Crusades were never simple. The journey from Europe to the Holy Land was a crucible, revealing the fragility of alliances, the cruelty of human desire, and the profound consequences of mixing divine mandate with earthly ambition. Beyond the sieges and battles, the Crusades reshaped the world. Cities were sacked, populations displaced, and cultures intertwined, often violently. The fire of conquest burned far beyond Jerusalem, touching villages, trading routes, and monasteries along the way. Faith, intended as a guiding light, sometimes became justification for acts that history would later call brutal. The paradox was clear. The same devotion that inspired heroism also enabled atrocity, and the promise of divine favor masked the complexities of human power. Yet, in the midst of bloodshed, there were moments of diplomacy and learning. Contacts between East and West, however fraught, facilitated the exchange of knowledge, art, and ideas. Maps were redrawn, languages shared, and philosophies carried across borders that might otherwise never have met. The Crusades, in their paradox, were both a destruction and a bridge, a testament to the enduring tension between faith's nobility and its capacity for violence. The records of the Vatican, preserved in careful silence, reveal a church caught between aspiration and responsibility. Letters from popes urging restraint coexist with calls to arms. Chronicles of knights extolling courage are shadowed by accounts of massacres and pillage. These documents do not seek to absolve nor to vilify entirely. They serve as a reminder that history is rarely a single narrative. It is a tapestry of intent, action, and consequence, woven by both human devotion and human flaw. For centuries, the Crusades were remembered as holy campaigns, stories told in sermons and illuminated manuscripts. But the true story, preserved in archives and fragments of correspondence, tells of complexity, of morality weighed against ambition, faith guiding swords as often as it restrained them, and the enduring human cost of religious zeal. The holy fire burned, and its smoke touched the hearts of generations, leaving lessons about power, conviction, and the fragility of ethical certainty. Even today, echoes of the Crusades remain in cities, ruins, and the collective memory of peoples once swept into their path. They are reminders that faith, when wielded as a weapon, carries consequences far beyond the intentions of those who invoke it. And they tell us something essential about history itself, that the line between divine purpose and human ambition is thin, and that the stories we inherit are often as much about the people who recorded them as the events themselves. The Crusades, in all their fury and devotion, are more than a chronicle of war. They are a study of humanity's capacity to conflate belief with conquest, conviction with violence. And beneath it all lies tears, the enduring question: how far will the hand of faith reach when it grasps the sword? For centuries the Church has stood as both sanctuary and sovereign, a place of prayer and a seat of power. Its influence stretched beyond the walls of monasteries and cathedrals, reaching into the courts of kings, the councils of nations, and the strategies of empires. The shadow beneath the cross is not merely theological, it is political, a delicate equilibrium where salvation and control intertwine, where spiritual authority becomes inseparable from worldly influence. From medieval Europe to the dawn of the modern age, popes and prelates navigated a landscape fraught with ambition, intrigue, and rebellion. Every decree of canon law, every papal bull, carried not only spiritual weight, but the subtle force of governance. A blessing could crown a king, a censure could delegitimize a ruler, and a letter could alter the course of diplomacy. In this tightrope walk, the Church had to preserve its moral authority while exercising power, a balancing act as precarious as it was pervasive. The archives tell stories of strategic marriages arranged under the guidance of the papacy, of alliances brokered through subtle counsel, and of interventions that shifted the fate of nations without the clash of armies. Even in matters of war, the Church wielded influence quietly, encouraging ceasefires, mediating disputes, and at times sanctioning campaigns that served both divine and temporal interests. Faith and politics were never separate. They were two currents in the same river, flowing together to shape history. Yet the marriage of power and piety carried inherent danger. Decisions made for spiritual justification often concealed worldly ambition, and devotion sometimes masked desire for control. The Church's role as arbiter of morality could be used to protect or to dominate. Monarchs sought papal approval not only to legitimize their rule, but to extend their influence. The papacy, in turn, relied on its temporal authority to enforce spiritual decrees. Each act, whether written in a private letter or declared from the steps of St. Peter's, reinforced the inseparability of faith and politics. The shadow beneath the cross also reveals the human cost of this duality. Reforms clashed with tradition, dissenters were silenced, and communities bore the consequences of decisions made far from their lands. The Church's attempts to navigate moral obligation and political necessity often produced tension, compromise, and occasionally contradiction. Yet in this tension lies the essence of its enduring power, the ability to adapt, to endure, and to influence generations without ever surrendering the core of its spiritual mission. History remembers the Church as a custodian of faith, yet the records hidden in its vaults recount a more complex narrative, one of negotiation, discretion, and pragmatic decision-making. Popes who guided kingdoms with counsel were also shepherds of souls. Cardinals who shaped treaties were also custodians of prayer. In every era, the Church's hand touched both altar and throne, proving that power and piety rarely walk apart, and that leadership, even in its highest spiritual form, is inseparable from worldly responsibility. Today, as scholars trace the Church's influence across centuries, the shadow beneath the cross remains a reminder of the duality of human institutions. It is a testament to the enduring challenge of reconciling ideals with authority, morality with strategy, devotion with control. And it serves as a quiet reflection for all who study history, that the same institution that elevates the spirit also navigates the currents of human ambition, walking a tightrope that has shaped the fate of the world, one decision at a time. The Church's shadow endures, not as a mark of malice, but as a measure of its complexity. Beneath every cross lies the delicate interplay of faith and politics, a testament to the human desire to wield power wisely, to guide with conviction, and to balance the sacred with the temporal in ways that history continues to reveal. In the quiet corridors of the Vatican, amidst the echo of footsteps and the rustle of parchment, there exists a truth both timeless and elusive. Not all secrets are sins. Some are burdens, heavier than most could bear, carrying the weight of conscience, of history, of humanity itself. Within the vaults of faith and power, there are stories that have never been told, letters that have never been sent, and knowledge too profound for a world still learning what forgiveness, mercy, and understanding truly mean. For centuries, the Church has been a custodian, not only of scripture and ritual, but of human vulnerability. Behind every decree, every seal, and every forbidden document lie choices made in the tension between revelation and restraint. To reveal certain truths prematurely might have unsettled the hearts of the faithful, disrupted societies, or threatened the fragile balance between morality and power. And so, some truths were held back, not out of deceit, but out of care for the world's capacity to receive them. These hidden truths are woven into the fabric of history, echoing in the margins of manuscripts and the quiet corners of sacred spaces. They remind us that knowledge and understanding are not always aligned with timing. The story of Galileo, silenced but not defeated. The confessions that forgave the Templars centuries too late. The secret diplomacy of popes shaping nations unseen. Each is a testament to the patience of wisdom, the caution of responsibility, and the delicate interplay between revelation and restraint. Yet secrets are not lifeless. Even when hidden, they influence the world in subtle ways. They guide decisions, shape conscience, and bear silent witness to the struggles of those who carry them. A secret kept can be an act of protection, a recognition of human frailty, or an acknowledgement that some knowledge demands maturity before it can illuminate. In this, the Church, for all its grandeur and authority, becomes a mirror of humanity itself, capable of profound insight, yet aware of its limits. In the final reflection, one sees the weight of moral responsibility that accompanies faith and authority. Power is not measured only by what is spoken aloud or decreed. It is measured by the restraint exercised, by the discernment of when to reveal and when to hold back. The most sacred truths are not always the most visible. Some live in silence, whispered only in prayer, preserved in trust, and carried across generations with care. This is the enduring lesson of the Vatican's hidden histories. Truth, in its rawest form, is not always safe, not always kind, not always ready to be embraced. To reveal it prematurely is to risk harm. To conceal it wisely is to show foresight. The archives, the letters, the forbidden texts all speak of this delicate balance, where secrecy is sometimes a form of mercy and patience a form of faith. And so, the story of the Church's hidden knowledge ends not in scandal or revelation, but in reflection. It is a reminder that humanity itself is a work in progress, learning to reconcile curiosity with humility, power with compassion, and knowledge with forgiveness. Some truths remain veiled not to deceive, but to protect. Not to control, but to guide. Not to punish, but to prepare a world capable of receiving them. Beneath the frescoed ceilings, amid the silent vaults and the lingering fragrance of incense, the unspoken truths endure. They are neither sins nor secrets in the ordinary sense. They are guardians of wisdom, waiting patiently for the moment when the world can finally understand, accept, and forgive. And in that waiting there is hope, that even the heaviest truths, once revealed in their time, may illuminate the path toward compassion, understanding, and the quiet race of human reflection. The echoes of history are never truly silent. They live in the stories we uncover, in the mysteries we dare to explore, and in the truths we are brave enough to witness. By subscribing to Mysteries of Earth, you become part of a journey through time, a journey where every secret has meaning, and every revelation deepens our understanding of the world around us. Like this video to honor the voices hidden in silence, share it to invite others to walk these hidden paths, and subscribe to stay with us as we continue to reveal the untold, the forbidden, and the extraordinary. Together, we keep history alive. One story, one mystery, one truth at a time.